From a fiery pit deep within the Blackbird Studios, we welcome you to listen to the Rave X Podcast of Horrors. And now, Rave X.
Thank you for tuning in to a very special Halloween edition of the Rave X Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a man, but not just any man, a monster. A monster named Charles Frederick Albright, born August 10th, 1933, in Dallas, Texas. You see, what made him such a monster was, he was convicted of killing one woman and heavily suspected of killing two more. He was also convicted of burglary, forgery, theft, assault, in addition to a handful of other petty crimes before his reign of terror came to an end. How did Mr. Albright become this way? How did he become a monster? Well, for that, kids, we're going to have to go back to Dallas, Texas, 1933, where it all began, and see what or who made him such a very bad man. Charles Albright was given up for adoption at birth. Some say his real mother was just a drunken tramp who slept away around town. But he was adopted from an orphanage by Deli and Fred Albright. Deli, well, she was a school teacher, and Fred, he worked odd jobs. His adoptive mother, although very loving of him, was also very strict and very overprotective. His dad often came home a little drunk, sometimes beat him a little too much. You see, shortly after his 13th birthday, he received his first gun. And he would use his gun to kill various small animals, and then his mother would teach him how to clean and stuff them. She was an expert at taxidermy. Well, it didn't take long for little Charlie to start getting into trouble. At 14, he was arrested for petty theft. At 15, aggravated assault, and on and on. Later, while attending college, he was pulled over by the police for driving erratically and found to be in the possession of stolen merchandise and 2 loaded handguns. He spent 1 year in jail. He went on through his 20s, committing various crimes such as falsifying government documents, forging checks, and burglary. But it wasn't until 1981, at the age of 48, when the monster inside of him started to show its true face. While visiting friends in Texas, he was caught in the act of sexually molesting their 14-year-old daughter. He pleaded guilty in court and received 1 year's probation. It was, to say the least, a different time. But outside of court, he maintained his innocence, saying, "I just didn't want any hassle, so I took the probation." Also, it's worth noting, in 1984, he applied to the Boy Scouts of America. His application, thankfully, was declined. Charles soon, in his adult life, hooked up with a woman named Dixie. They ended up living together as a couple, but Charles never stopped drinking and frequenting the local hookers. You see, Dixie pretended not to notice. She probably feared for her own safety. But in 1991, he went to visit a local whore named Mary Lou Pratt. They spent the night together, and in the morning, her body was found near some bushes, naked, severely beaten, with a single .44 caliber bullet wound to the back of her head. Oh, and did I mention, Mr. Albright had removed both her eyes with surgical precision. The eyes were nowhere to be found. But you see, it didn't stop there. The monster inside Mr. Albright had gotten its first real taste of human blood. The power, the rush. He was hooked. In February of 1991, he picked up a sex worker named Susan Beth Peterson. They went back to her place and, well, he made use of her. And a few days later, they found her horribly beaten body in a dumpster with 3 .44 caliber bullet wounds to her head. Also, both her eyes were removed, as police would later note, with, quote, the precision of a surgeon. And the monster would claim one more life before it was all said and done. In March, he chose what would be his final victim, a 23-year-old African-American hooker named Shirley Williams. Shirley was found in the same area as his other victims. Beaten, naked, well, you know how the story goes. Also, he removed her eyes. But in March of 1991, Johnny Law finally caught up to Mr. Albright. He was arrested and convicted based on skin samples found under his victim's nails and eyewitness reports from the scene, not to mention that all the murders were exactly the same. In court, he pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was convicted and incarcerated at John Montford Psychiatric Unit in Lubbock, Texas. Oh, and one more thing. The monster still lives to this day. He'll be 86 in August. And that is the story, the horrific tale, of the man named Charles Frederick Albright. A man whose problems started well before his birth, and with demons he just couldn't shake, he became more than a man. He became a true tale of nightmares, the kind that haunt your dreams and make you turn to look over your shoulder when walking down the street alone at night. Oh, and it's worth mentioning, they never did find any of the eyes from his victims, and to this day he refuses to tell anyone exactly what he did with them. But I have a theory, kids. Would you like to hear it? You see, when he was a kid, and his mother, his very strict, dominating mother, was teaching him the art of taxidermy, she didn't want to spring for the 10 cents for the glass eyes needed to finish his masterpieces. Instead, she insisted that he use bargain bin buttons, simple buttons for shirts or coats. They could be purchased for a penny, and that would save her some cash. You see, he was then instructed to stitch these buttons, often mismatched and odd-sized, to the eyes of his taxidermied animals. If you ask me, I think she should have ponied up the 10 cents. Well, kiddies, that concludes our story, if you want to call it a story. More of a descent into horror and madness of a man who would never ever amount to anything. Because, if you ask me, he was doomed from the start. Well, thank you for joining me for a very special Rave X Podcast, Episode 36, Windows to the Soul. I did enjoy the company. Because you see, some monsters are real. And when you're tucking in your children, or your little sister or brother, and the kids ask you, are monsters real? You can't really say no. All you can really say is, they're not here. For now. And do me a favor. Remember this. There is absolutely nothing that exists in the dark that isn't already there when the lights are on. My name's Rave X, and I'll be seeing you.
That was Rave X, Podcast of Horrors. Good night.